Have you ever looked at a simple green plant and thought, wow, that could send me to prison for 20 years? It sounds completely absurd, does it not? Nature just doing its thing, growing out of the dirt, and yet governments around the world spend billions of dollars trying to eradicate certain crops. Today, we are talking about 5 illegal crops that the government absolutely does not want you to grow in your backyard. But here is the real hook. I promise you, the reasons behind these bans are not what you think. It is not always about protecting public health or stopping dangerous cartels. Sometimes it is about corporate greed, accidental insect plagues, or protecting massive industries from going bankrupt. By the end of this video, you are going to look at the weeds in your garden in a completely different way. I want you to drop a comment right now. Do you think a naturally occurring plant should ever be illegal? Let me know your stance, and let us dive into the strange world of forbidden botany. Before we jump into our list of 5 forbidden plants, we need to understand a little bit of history. For thousands of years, humans and plants had a pretty simple relationship. We found a plant, we figured out if it was tasty, useful, or deadly, and we grew it. Kings and emperors rarely cared what weeds a peasant was pulling from the dirt. But as the world entered the industrial age in the 20th century, everything changed. Suddenly, plants became big business. Agriculture turned into a global commodity. And with massive money came massive regulations. Governments started deciding which plants were acceptable and which were dangerous. They created lists, classifications, and total bans. Sometimes these laws were made by well-meaning doctors trying to stop poisonings, but very often these laws were drafted by powerful lobbyists, wealthy businessmen, and politicians with hidden agendas. The line between a miracle medicine, a dangerous drug, and an invasive pest became incredibly blurred. So keep that context in mind as we explore our first incredibly controversial crop. So let us start with our very first forbidden plant on this crazy list. You have probably heard of it, but the truth is hidden under layers of myths. We are talking about hemp. Now close your eyes and picture a massive fleet of ancient sailing ships exploring the ocean. Those giant sails catching the wind? They were made entirely of hemp, the thick ropes holding the entire ship together, also made of hemp. For thousands of years, this plant was the absolute backbone of human civilization. It was completely normal to grow it everywhere. In fact, in some periods of early American history, governments actually legally required farmers to grow this exact crop. It was considered a patriotic duty. If you did not grow it, you could face serious financial penalties. It provided strong clothing, durable paper, and excellent building materials. It is a completely versatile miracle of nature that grows incredibly fast. But today, if you plant a random seed in your backyard, you might get a very unpleasant visit from federal law enforcement. How did we go from mandatory farming to absolute prohibition? The story is wild. The dark transition from a hero crop to a criminal weed involves a lot of greed. In the early 20th century, powerful new industries were rising. We are talking about the massive timber industry making paper from trees, and the giant chemical companies inventing synthetic plastics and nylons. Hemp was a massive threat to their profits because it was cheap, renewable, and easy to grow. So, a massive smear campaign was launched. Wealthy newspaper owners printed terrifying stories about the dangers of the plant. And here is where we need to debunk a massive myth. Industrial hemp is not the same thing as the marijuana that gets people high. They are cousins, yes, but hemp has virtually zero psychoactive properties. You could smoke an entire field of industrial hemp, and all you would get is a terrible headache. But the smear campaign intentionally confused the two. By grouping the harmless industrial crop with the psychoactive drug, powerful businessmen successfully lobbied the government to ban the whole family of plants. It was a brilliant, evil corporate strategy. Let us talk about the environmental impact of this massive ban. When the government forced farmers to stop growing hemp, they had to switch to other crops. Picture a vast, dry field of cotton. Cotton requires massive amounts of water and heavy chemical pesticides to survive. Hemp, on the other hand, is basically a weed. It requires half the water, almost no pesticides, and its deep roots actually clean toxic chemicals out of the soil. By banning this crop, the government inadvertently caused decades of environmental damage. We chopped down ancient forests to make paper, when we could have just grown a field of tall green stalks every few months. It is a prime example of how short-sighted laws can alter the entire ecosystem. Imagine a world where all our cardboard boxes, shopping bags, and t-shirts were made from a plant that heals the dirt it grows in. That is the reality we lost when the government decided to criminalize a simple agricultural staple. But wait, there is a twist in the modern era. Recently, governments have slowly started to realize their massive mistake. In the year 2018, the United States finally passed a farming bill that legally separated industrial hemp from illegal narcotics. But do not grab your gardening gloves just yet. It is still heavily restricted. Picture a poor farmer trying to navigate an absolute mountain of red tape, expensive permits, and surprise government inspections just to grow a plant that used to grow wild in the ditches. If their crop accidentally tests even a fraction of a percent over the legal limit for psychoactive compounds, the government forces them to burn the entire field to the ground. Millions of dollars are destroyed because of microscopic chemical variations. So, while it is technically legal again, the government still makes it incredibly difficult and risky to cultivate. They still do not really want you to grow it freely. Now, let us move on to crop number 2. This one is going to completely blow your mind because it has absolutely nothing to do with drugs, cartels, or getting high. We are talking about the black currant. Yes, you heard me correctly. A simple, sweet, little purple berry was entirely banned in the United States for nearly a century. If you live in Europe, you are probably very confused right now. Over there, black currant flavor is everywhere. It is in candies, juices, jams, and sodas. But if you grew up in America, you probably have no idea what a black currant even tastes like. Most Americans think purple candy is supposed to taste like grapes. Why? Because the federal government declared absolute war on this innocent little bush in the early 1900s. Picture a bowl of juicy, harmless berries sitting next to a massive hazard sign. It seems like a joke, but the consequences were very real and heavily enforced by the Department of Agriculture. So why did the government hate a berry so much? It all comes down to a tiny microscopic fungus called white pine blister rust. In the early 20th century, the American timber industry was booming. Millions of white pine trees were being chopped down to build houses and cities. But this nasty fungus started killing the pine trees. Scientists discovered that the fungus needed 2 hosts to survive. It spent part of its life cycle on pine trees and the other part of its life cycle on black currant bushes. The government was faced with a choice: save the massive multi-million-dollar timber industry or save a bush that makes tasty jam. Obviously, money won. Picture giant, roaring logging trucks celebrating while government agents marched into private gardens and forests to violently rip out every single black currant bush they could find. They actually hired crews of men to hike through the woods and destroy this plant for decades. The cultural impact of this ban is actually quite fascinating. Because the black currant was eradicated for generations, an entire country simply forgot that it existed. The flavor profile was completely erased from the American palate. When candy companies needed a purple flavor, they had to invent artificial grape instead. Imagine an alternate universe where the timber industry was not so powerful, and today every American kid drank black currant juice boxes instead of apple juice. It shows just how deeply government agricultural policies can rewrite our daily lives and our culture. You are literally tasting the results of 100-year-old forestry law every time you eat a piece of fruit candy. It is a perfect illustration of how invisible government hands shape the most basic elements of our existence, right down to our taste buds and our grocery store aisles. Eventually, scientists bred new types of black currants that were completely immune to the dreaded pine tree fungus. So the federal government finally lifted the nationwide ban in the year 1966. However, the crazy part is that many individual states forgot to update their local laws. Even today, depending on where you live, it might still be technically illegal to plant a black currant bush in your backyard. Picture a secret, underground garden hidden behind a tall fence in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where a rebel gardener is secretly growing forbidden berries. It sounds like a comedy movie, but it is real life. The government bureaucracy is so slow that a plant proven to be completely safe decades ago is still treated like a dangerous criminal in certain zip codes. It really makes you wonder what other harmless plants are currently trapped in a web of outdated legal nonsense. All right, let us dive into our third illegal crop, and this one is highly controversial. We are talking about the coca leaf. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let us set the scene. Imagine you are hiking high in the breathtaking Andes Mountains of South America. The air is incredibly thin, and you can barely catch your breath. An indigenous farmer hands you a simple green leaf to chew on. For thousands of years, the people of the Andes have grown and consumed the coca leaf. It is a mild stimulant, sort of like drinking a strong cup of coffee. It cures altitude sickness, stops hunger, and provides energy for hard labor. It is a deeply sacred plant with rich cultural and religious significance. In its natural, unprocessed form, it is completely safe and absolutely vital to the traditional way of life in countries like Peru and Bolivia. It is just a leaf on a bush. But then, Western science got involved, and everything went terribly wrong. In the late 1800s, European chemists figured out how to extract the active alkaloids from the coca leaf and concentrate them into a massive, powerful white powder. They created cocaine. And here is where we need to debunk a very dangerous myth. Chewing a raw coca leaf is absolutely nothing like doing a line of processed powder. It is like comparing eating a poppy seed muffin to injecting heroin. The concentration levels are entirely different. Visualize a tiny green leaf slowly morphing into a giant, glowing hazard symbol. Because of the incredible danger of the concentrated powder, Western governments completely panicked. They did not just ban the chemical process, they decided to declare war on the plant itself. They blamed the leaf for the sins of the laboratory. This panic led to a massive international ban. The United Nations stepped in and classified the raw coca leaf as a dangerous narcotic, right alongside heavy synthetic drugs. Suddenly, traditional indigenous farmers, who were just growing the same plant their ancestors had grown for 3,000 years, were labeled as international criminals overnight. Picture a massive, cold marble courtroom where men in expensive suits slam a gavel down, making an entire culture illegal. The government strategy was complete eradication. They sprayed toxic chemicals from airplanes over the mountains, poisoning the soil and the local water supply, all to kill a bush. The people who relied on this crop for traditional medicine and a basic income were thrust into poverty. It is a classic example of foreign governments imposing their own fears onto a region they do not fully understand. But here is the absolute most hypocritical part of the entire coca leaf story. While it is strictly illegal for you to grow it, or for a traditional farmer to export it, there is one massive exception. There is a famous soda loophole. Picture a frosty, bubbling glass of dark cola with ice clinking around. Yes, the Coca-Cola Company. Through a very special, highly guarded arrangement with the federal government, one specific corporation in the United States is legally allowed to import thousands of pounds of raw coca leaves every single year. They use a special factory to extract the cocaine, which is sold to pharmaceutical companies for medical use, and the leftover flavor from the leaf goes directly into the secret soda recipe. So, the government will throw you in prison for growing a single plant, but a multi-billion-dollar corporation gets a special golden ticket to import it by the ton. It is rules for thee, but not for me. Moving right along to crop number 4. This is a plant you might have never heard of unless you are from the Horn of Africa or the Arabian Peninsula. The plant is called currant. Imagine walking into a bustling, colorful, noisy market in Yemen or Ethiopia on a warm afternoon. You will see groups of men sitting around, talking, laughing, and chewing on bundles of fresh green leaves. This is currant. For centuries, it has been the absolute center of social life in these regions. Chewing it produces a mild feeling of euphoria and alertness. It is very similar to how people in the West meet up at a cafe to drink strong espresso and gossip. It is not a party drug. It is a social lubricant deeply ingrained in the daily routine of millions of normal, hard-working people. It brings communities together for hours of conversation. So why does the government care? Well, the active ingredient in currant degrades incredibly quickly after it is picked. It only stays fresh for about 48 hours. When immigrants from these regions moved to Western countries, they tried to import the plant so they could continue their cultural traditions. But Western health organizations isolated the active chemicals, cathinone and cathine, and decided they were dangerous stimulants. Suddenly, customs agents at busy international airports were treating bundles of leaves like weapons-grade contraband. Visualize a stressful scene of security officers in blue gloves tearing through a traveler's luggage to confiscate a bunch of twigs. The governments of the United States, Canada, and most of Europe classified currant as a highly illegal substance, placing it in the same legal category as highly addictive synthetic drugs. This absolute ban created a massive and tragic clash of cultures. Imagine moving to a new country and suddenly discovering that your equivalent of a morning cup of coffee is now considered a felony. Picture a normal family sitting around their living room table after dinner, enjoying a cultural tradition, when suddenly red and blue police lights flash through the window. Honest, law-abiding immigrants were suddenly being arrested and thrown into the criminal justice system simply for chewing a leaf that their grandfathers chewed. It created deep mistrust between these communities and law enforcement. The government argued they were protecting public health, but critics argue it was just a severe misunderstanding of a foreign culture. It is a classic case of cultural ignorance leading to heavy-handed legislation. Furthermore, the global ban on currant had a devastating economic impact back in the countries where it is grown. In places like Yemen and parts of Kenya, currant is one of the most reliable and profitable cash crops a farmer can grow. It survives in tough climates where other food crops fail. When European countries suddenly slammed their doors shut and banned all imports, it wiped out the primary source of income for thousands of poor rural farmers. Visualize endless fields of green shrubs with tired farmers standing in the dirt, looking incredibly worried about how they will feed their children. The decisions made in air-conditioned offices in London or Washington destroyed the livelihoods of people living thousands of miles away. It perfectly shows how making a plant illegal has a massive, brutal domino effect on the global economy. Finally, we arrive at crop number 5. This one has a truly wild history of ancient medicine mixed with modern greed. We are talking about ephedra, also known as Mormon tea. Let us travel back in time thousands of years to ancient China. Picture an old, dusty apothecary filled with hundreds of tiny wooden drawers, smelling of dried herbs and roots. Traditional healers used a plant called ma huang, which is a species of ephedra, to treat asthma, colds, and severe coughs. It opens up the airways beautifully. When pioneers traveled across the American West, they used a local version of this plant to brew a bitter tea for energy and health. For centuries, it was respected as a powerful, natural medicine that required careful use. Nobody had any major problems with it. But then, the 1990s happened. Welcome to the era of extreme fitness and the diet pill craze. Greedy supplement companies realized that the active compound in the plant, ephedrine, sped up the heart rate and metabolism. They figured out they could market it as a miracle weight loss cure and a pre-workout energy booster. Visualize those flashy, aggressive neon television commercials from the 1990s, featuring incredibly muscular people promising you instant abdominal muscles if you just take their pills. The market was absolutely flooded with cheap, highly concentrated ephedra supplements. People were taking massive, unregulated doses to lose weight quickly. The plant was taken completely out of its traditional, balanced context and turned into a massive corporate cash grab. And then came the tragic consequences and the heavy hammer of the law. Because people were taking insane amounts of these highly concentrated pills, they started having heart attacks and strokes. Several high-profile athletes tragically died. The public outcry was massive, so the government health organizations stepped in and dropped a total ban on dietary supplements containing ephedra. Visualize a giant red rejected stamp smashing down onto a plastic bottle of diet pills. And here is the myth we must debunk. The plant itself was not evil. The problem was the extreme, unnatural dosage created by greedy companies. But, as usual, the government decided it was easier to criminalize the entire botanical source rather than regulate the reckless supplement industry. If you try to grow and sell the raw plant today, you will face massive legal trouble. But wait, there is an incredible irony to this final story. The government told you that the compounds in the ephedra plant were far too dangerous for you to consume. But the next time you have a terrible cold and a stuffed-up nose, go to a bright, modern pharmacy. Pick up a box of standard over-the-counter cold medicine and look at the ingredients. You will likely see pseudoephedrine. Yes, the synthesized chemical cousin of the exact plant they banned. Visualize a person easily buying this chemical syrup at a cash register while the natural plant sits on an illegal list. The pharmaceutical companies are allowed to synthesize the compound and sell it back to you at a premium price, but you are not trusted to grow the natural source in your garden. It perfectly encapsulates why the government wants certain crops illegal. They want to control the market, the dosage, and the profits. So there you have it. 5 incredibly fascinating crops that the government absolutely does not want you to grow. We have seen how a simple green leaf can become the center of a massive global conflict. We have learned that the line between a miracle medicine, a deadly poison, and a harmless berry is often drawn by powerful lobbyists, wealthy corporations, and frightened politicians, rather than actual science. From the tragic smear campaign against hemp, to the bizarre war against black currants to save pine trees, it is clear that botanical history is full of wild twists and turns. The rules of agriculture are not always built on common sense. They are built on economics and control. I hope this video completely changed how you look at the laws governing nature. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive. If you learned something new today, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video. It really helps the channel grow. Now, I have a question for you to answer in the comments. Which of these 5 plants do you think should be completely legalized tomorrow, and why? Let us start a debate down below, and I will see you in the next video.